There is a feeling that nearly every person experiences at some point in their life, yet we speak about it honestly with surprising rarity, not because we are ashamed of it, but because it is difficult to articulate precisely. There is no single word for it, no clear cause, and often we cannot even say when it began. From the outside, everything usually appears to be fine. A person goes about their life, works, moves forward, fulfills their responsibilities, and in the eyes of others, is likely doing quite well. There are no obvious failures, no dramatic turning points. And yet, there is a hard-to-define sense of absence, a quiet, inner restlessness that reminds us from time to time that something is not quite right. Perhaps you have felt this too. You wake up in the morning, get through your day, and then in the evening, when a moment of silence finally surrounds you, a question surfaces that you managed to suppress during the day. It may not take such a clear form, but somehow it comes down to this. Am I truly living the life I want to live? This question frightens many people, not because the answer would necessarily be unfavorable, but because it points to something we rarely confront. The fact that we spend a great portion of our lives building toward goals, while devoting very little time to examining whether those goals are truly our own. When we are children, we naturally adopt patterns from others. From our families, our schools, and our surroundings, we learn what it means to be successful, what it means to be a responsible adult, and what milestones a person must pass through in order to live a good life. These patterns are not inherently bad. In many cases, they serve as useful reference points. The problem begins when we never stop to examine them, because it can easily happen that for years we move along a path that we did not actually choose ourselves. We simply accepted it because everyone else was heading in the same direction. We completed our education, earned our credentials, found work, tried to advance, tried to create security for ourselves, and perhaps never paused for a single moment to ask whether any of it was truly aligned with who we are. The feeling of being lost, therefore, often does not stem from having no direction. Quite the contrary. Many people have far too many goals. The problem is that not all of them belong to those people. Some goals were given to us by society, some were suggested by our environment, and some we began pursuing simply because others seemed happy as a result. But the difference is not always easy to recognize. Perhaps this is why it happens so often that someone achieves something they desired for years, only to feel a brief sense of relief rather than the long-anticipated fulfillment. A few days, a few weeks, perhaps a few months later, the same emptiness returns. Not because the person is ungrateful or self-indulgent, but because reaching a goal and experiencing inner fulfillment are not always the same thing. The modern world makes this situation even more difficult. We have never had so many options to choose from when it comes to how we live our lives, and at first glance, this appears to be an extraordinary freedom. But freedom has a less visible side as well. The more options we have before us, the greater the responsibility we carry in deciding which one to choose. In the past, people's lives were far more strongly shaped by their family, their community, or their social position. Today, by contrast, almost anything is possible. And while this is undoubtedly progress, it also places a burden of decision-making on the individual that many people are not prepared for. It is no coincidence that even as we have grown increasingly free, more and more people feel they have lost their internal sense of direction. Layered on top of all this is the constant informational noise that surrounds us every day. When we open a social media platform, Within a few minutes, we gain a glimpse into the lives of hundreds of people. We see their successes, their travels, their achievements, their relationships, their best moments. And the human mind instinctively compares. It cannot help itself. The problem is that in doing so, we are comparing our own complete reality to others' carefully curated highlights. That comparison almost always ends the same way. We feel behind, as though we are doing something wrong, as though others already know where they are going, while we are still searching for our path. Yet the truth is often precisely the opposite. Most people are far more uncertain than they appear from the outside. It is just that photographs are rarely taken of that uncertainty, posts are rarely written about it, and we rarely speak of it in public. Perhaps this is why we so often feel alone in our sense of being lost, while in reality, an entire generation shares the same experience. Because the more noise surrounds us, the harder it becomes to hear the one voice that would truly matter, our own. And perhaps this is where we arrive at the question that most people spend their entire lives circling around. Not because it is unimportant, but precisely because it is so important that honestly facing it feels uncomfortable, and sometimes even frightening. Who are you, really, if for a moment we set aside all the roles you put on each day? Who are you when you are not defined by your work, by your family's expectations, by your social standing, or by what others think of you? What would you want to do with your life if you had nothing to prove to anyone? In what direction would you move if you were certain that no one would judge you for your choices? Most people cannot answer these questions immediately, not because they have no answers, but because they rarely give themselves the opportunity to hear them in the first place. We live in a world that constantly prompts us to react. We respond to messages, we react to news, we adapt to circumstances, we fulfill our obligations, and all the while we try to meet the countless spoken and unspoken expectations that surround us. There is nothing inherently wrong with any of that. The problem, rather, is that while we are in constant motion, we rarely stop long enough to ask ourselves the simplest question: is this life truly aligned with who I am? Perhaps we avoid this question because we sense that the answer would not always be reassuring. Because if you honestly confront it, you may well discover something you had managed to keep hidden behind daily routine, tasks, and constant busyness. The realization that for years you have been moving toward goals that you did not actually choose, that certain decisions were shaped not by your own convictions, but by the expectations of others. And that the life which may appear perfectly fine from the outside has for quite some time not been giving you the feeling you had hoped it would. For this reason, many people try to cover up this unsettling realization. Not consciously, and not out of bad intent. They simply look for something that distracts them from it. They take on more work, fill their schedules, set new goals, watch series, shop, travel, make plans. For a while, this works. Constant busyness is an effective painkiller. As long as something is always happening, there is no time to face the questions that are waiting for us in silence. But sooner or later, silence always arrives. There comes a morning when you have not yet checked your phone, the day has not yet begun, and for a few seconds you are alone with your thoughts. In these moments, that familiar feeling often resurfaces, the one you may have been trying to ignore for months or even years. Not loudly, not dramatically. It is simply there, just as it was before. It is important to understand that this, in itself, does not necessarily indicate illness, laziness, or ingratitude. It is much more like a signal, an internal warning that is trying to draw your attention to something important you have overlooked, not the world, not other people, yourself. At this point, many people turn to money for answers. They believe that if they had greater financial security, everything would finally fall into place. And it is true that money matters. Financial security provides freedom, reduces stress, and opens up opportunities that make it much easier to build a good life. There is no reason to pretend otherwise. But money has its limits. It can provide security, but not identity. It can create comfort, but not purpose. It can help you get where you are going, but it cannot decide for you which direction is worth taking. Over the years, I have seen many people who achieved everything they once desired in financial terms, yet still struggled with the same uncertainty as those who were just at the beginning of their journey. The reason is simple. Money is not a compass. It is more like a powerful engine. If you know where you are headed, it moves you forward faster. But if you do not, it only takes you farther away from the point where you might have asked the right questions. The same is true for career, recognition, status, or even the kind of visibility people pursue on social media. These are all amplifiers. They magnify what is already within you. But on their own, they do not answer the question of who you really are or what kind of life you want to live. This is why when someone asks what the right direction is, no one can give a ready-made answer. I cannot either. Direction is not a universal formula that works the same way for everyone. It is always personal. It always begins within. Not from statistics, not from trends, not from other people's opinions, and not from what algorithms place in front of you each day. Direction is born from the questions you are willing to ask yourself, from the moments when you do not run from uncertainty but pay attention to it, when you do not ask what would be the logical or expected decision, but what truly matters to you, not what should matter, but what actually does. And perhaps this is the idea I would like you to take with you from this video. The feeling of being lost does not necessarily mean that you are in the wrong place. Often, it means you have started to notice something you did not see before, that the path you have been following automatically is not always the same as your own path. Most people never arrive at this realization, not because they are less intelligent or less courageous, but because the modern world does almost everything it can to prevent you from being alone with your thoughts. There is always another notification, another task, another goal, another distraction. That is why when you finally pause and begin to feel this uncertain, uncomfortable state, it is not necessarily a step backward. It may be your first real step forward. Living on autopilot is comfortable in many ways. It does not require asking too many questions. You do what is expected of you, follow the designated path, and the years pass. There is nothing inherently wrong with that. But over time, many people realize that comfort is not the same as fulfillment. Awakening, on the other hand, is rarely comfortable. When you begin to ask questions, simple answers disappear. You can no longer follow the crowd with the same confidence, because you have already seen that other paths exist. And once you have seen that, you can no longer completely ignore it. Still, every real change begins here. Not with immediately finding all the answers, but with finally being willing to ask the questions honestly. That is why I believe that feeling lost is not an end point. It is much more of a beginning. The beginning of gradually discovering who you truly are, what values you want to live by, and what kind of life you would build for yourself if you were not guided by the expectations of others. This process is slow, sometimes confusing, sometimes distinctly uncomfortable. But every meaningful change starts this way. And perhaps it is not even most important that you know exactly where you are going at this moment. For now, it may be enough to recognize that up to this point, your own compass has not guided you at every step. That realization is more valuable than it may seem at first. Because most people never give themselves enough silence to reach this point. But you have just done that, and that matters. If this video has sparked thoughts you have been postponing for a long time, I invite you to join me next time as well. In the next part, we will explore how to gradually reconnect with your inner voice in a world that constantly tries to place other people's opinions at the center of your attention. Thank you for being here today. I will see you in the next video.